First of all, we have Joanna Trewern, and Joanna's head of research at ProVeg International, and you're going to tell us a bit about ProVeg, aren't you, when you talk? And Joanna's going to talk about transforming UK diets for health and sustainability.
Lovely, thank you very much, Rosemary. So just to start us off, I imagine that many of you in the room will have never heard ProVeg. ProVeg is one of the only international NGOs that's focused specifically on food systems transformation, and within that, advancing plant-based diets globally. We work with a whole host of different stakeholders, from food businesses and startups to policymakers, and we also engage the general public on this issue. And we've got offices in 10 countries across 4 continents, so a presence in Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Americas. So that's a little bit about ProVeg. I'm going to cover 4 sort of main things today. The first is introducing this concept of the climate-nature-nutrition nexus. The second is looking at, well, what are healthy, sustainable diets in the UK context? And how do we get there? I'm then going to touch on consumer behaviour with a particular focus on fruit and veg. And I'll then move on to some levers for change. So how can we actually get to where we know we need to get to? So first of all, we're in what we call today a triple challenge. And that triple challenge is how we ensure food and nutrition security for everyone globally, while also limiting global warming and reversing nature loss. The nutrition bit is really important here because today we produce enough food to feed the world. However, it's not providing adequate nutrition for everyone. So we need to remember that nutrition is the goal, not just producing vast amounts of food. And what this really means is that the goal for our food system has changed from producing vast amounts of calories to trying to deal with these 3 interlinked things. And they really are inextricably linked, climate, nature, and nutrition. We know that our food production won't happen and won't work unless we have a stable climate and intact ecosystems. That's fundamental. And we also know that food is a really powerful thing. And it's the key, really, to mitigating climate change and reversing nature loss. What we buy, cook, and eat every day, and how that food's produced, is key to solving this triple challenge that we face today. And what about the role of horticulture within all of that? Well, my view on this is that there's huge untapped potential within horticulture. Out of 391,000 plant species that we've identified, fewer than 200 are used at kind of commercial scale to feed us. What about all the kind of overlooked and underutilized plant species and crop varieties, many of which are rich in micronutrients? We need to be utilizing these overlooked species much more. So, coming to the UK. This is a bit about our current UK diet. So before ProVeg, I was at WWF in the UK, and I was part of this exciting research project that looked at the current UK diet. What are the impacts of the current UK diet, and how does it need to change in order to support the UK government to achieve its climate and nature goals? Probably no surprises here. What we're currently eating on average in the UK is pretty emissions intensive. But the good news is that if we are adopting at scale a plant-rich diet, by which I mean a diet that's much more in line with our government's dietary guidance, the Eat Well Guide, we can actually get pretty close to where we need to be to make sure the food system stays within planetary boundaries. So really thinking about the IPCC target. And we can achieve a 36% reduction, which is no mean feat at all when you think about actually the scale of the dietary changes we're talking about are manageable for most people. So that's something that excites me and gives me hope amongst all of this. You might be thinking, what about the remaining percentage? How do we actually get to that target? Well, we could achieve that either through more ambitious dietary shifts or through improvements to food production and reductions in food loss and waste. So lots of opportunities there. The other main challenge that keeps me awake at night is the way we're using our land. And this interesting sort of map of the United Kingdom is from the Independent National Food Strategy that came out a couple of years ago. What you can really see here is that there's a number of issues in the way we're using our land. First of all, a huge swathe of land at home, but also abroad, is being used for animal source. The challenge is that we use almost as much land for sugar beet production as we do for vegetables. Vegetables is something around 116,000 hectares and sugar beets coming in at 110,000. And we're also losing a lot of prime agricultural land to housing development. There was a really nice study by the Campaign to Protect Rural England a couple of years ago that showed that we have basically lost, I can't remember the number of hectares, but a land area that could have fed the combined populations of Liverpool, Manchester and Sheffield their 5 a day for a year. So essentially what all this means is that we're not maximising the use of our land when it comes to the provision of healthy diets. And these are some of the big things that we need to change if we are to deliver healthy, sustainable diets for the UK population. So where are we trying to get to? As I've sort of already said, what we need to see is adoption at scale of plant-rich diets that are based largely on whole foods. So a lot more fruit, veg, beans, pulses, and whole grains than we're eating at the moment. This diet shift is what's needed to help us transition to more sustainable agricultural methods while keeping our food system within planetary limits. So if we just sort of shift to more sustainable agricultural practices, but don't change how much and what we're producing, we won't be able to achieve that goal. Again, from the National Food Strategy, the team did some modelling looking at what this sort of shift means in terms of what we should be eating more of and less of. And they've set this goal of a 30% increase in UK fruit and veg consumption by 2032. Linked to that, 50% increase in fibre, as well as kind of reductions in foods that are high in fat, salt and sugar, and meat. What's really important here is that the environmental gains from this shift to production and consumption come from the reduction in meat. So if we were to just increase production and consumption of fruit and veg by 30%, but do nothing else, we wouldn't see that reduction in environmental impact. So this is really about managing those trade-offs and equipping us well to deliver healthy, sustainable diets. So, consumer behaviour. Before I dive into what people are doing, I thought actually a fundamental question is, how much fruit and veg should we be eating? Most of you in the room probably know the 5 a day, or at least I very much hope that everyone here is aware of that. But actually, the point I want to make here is that 5 a day is very much a minimum, right? And I think this gets a bit lost sometimes when we're talking about fruit and veg. So the Eat Well guide, which is this plate you can see up here, that's the official government guidance on diets, on what the UK population should be eating. And in that graph, that plate, the 5 a day message is used. However, and this is what I think is interesting, if you look at the modelling that sits behind the Eat Well guide, the guidance is actually much closer to 7 a day, 554 grams. And then if you look at other things, so the Eat Lancet planetary health diet, which Tim was a very important part of, it is a diet that's set out for, you know, what global consumption should look like within planetary boundaries, that's healthy and sustainable. The guidance there is actually at least 7 and up to 11 portions a day. Basically, we all need to be eating a lot more. But 5 a day is the real minimum, not a maximum that we should be aspiring to. So what are people actually eating? The Food Foundation, which is a UK non-profit organisation, really leading the way on looking at fruit and veg consumption in the UK. They looked at some national data on consumption, NDNS, and what they've worked out is that the mean intake for adults is around 300 grams a day. So falling short, really, of that 5 a day target. And I think what's really interesting in this whole sort of picture is that socio-demographic aspects have an influence on how much fruit and veg people are eating. So if you look at age, we've got 1/3 of adults in this country who meet the 5 a day target, or, you know, who are eating their 5 a day. Only 1 in 8 children are meeting that. So there's a huge disparity and a huge issue there in terms of veg consumption. There's a widening kind of demographic gap between income groups as well. The poorest 20% are eating 1 less portion than the richest 20%. It may not sound like much, but again, a huge issue. And then if you look at ethnicity, those from Asian or Asian British communities are the ones who are eating the most veg, which I think is really interesting in terms of food culture and the impact that that has on our diets. So a lot to think about there. Something to remember in all of this is that if you look at the whole host of kind of consumer studies and surveys out there, you will see that people want to eat better. And I think that's a hugely positive thing, right? Healthy, sustainable diets are viewed as aspirational. You know, people want to eat in a way that's better for their own health. They want to reduce their environmental impact. The challenge, though, is that when you look at behaviours, less than 1% are eating in line with the government's dietary advice. It's something like 0.001% of the population, which is terrifying, I think. But as I said, this is not because people don't want to eat better. The problem is that our diets are not defined by our aspirations or our preferences, really, in any great way. They're heavily influenced by what's available, what's affordable, what's accessible, and also how it's marketed. And Simon, I know you referred to kind of the impact of price. And I agree that's a hugely important determinant of what people are eating. So, and all these factors are beyond the control of individuals, right? They're things that are influenced or decided by food companies and by governments, which really serves to highlight the critical role that those actors have to play in helping people eat better and fundamentally making healthy, sustainable choices, including more veg and more fruit, the easy choice for people. So we've been through sort of where we are now, where we're trying to get to, and touched on the important role of government and industry. So what can they actually do, right? This is the important bit. What can these actors do to help people make healthier, more sustainable choices? Public procurement. This is an extremely important lever. There are some great examples, which, well, I'll touch on a couple in a second. But fundamentally, the procurement of institutions, whether that's hospitals, government buildings, military or schools, can be an important tool to sustainably increase both the supply and the demand of healthy, sustainable foods, such as fruit and veg. And if you introduce the right policy mechanisms, you have this really nice effect across the value chain, where you're promoting agrobiodiversity in production, and you're also feeding people, quite frankly, better food. As well as, extremely important, providing a secure market for local farmers. These contracts tend to be very big, they run over multiple years, so they're enough to help farmers have that secure market for their produce. One example of this type of work is a programme that ProVeg runs in the UK called School Plates. Through this project, we provide menu consultation services, recipe development, we train caterers, and provide teaching materials as well. The aim is really to increase the availability of plant-based meals within schools so that all children have that option available to them, should they want it. A bit further away from home, I love this example of Bolivia's school feeding programme. This was introduced in 2000, so it's been running, a considerable amount of time now. The idea is increasing access to healthy, diverse meals based on traditional Andean grains, fruits, and vegetables. It was introduced because there was this increasing problem of kind of junk food, essentially, coming into Bolivia. And the idea was really to address that and to make sure that pupils were getting access to healthy, nutritious foods. It also incentivizes pesticide-free local production and agrobiodiversity, extremely important. And as I mentioned before, it kind of does a good job of providing that secure market for local farmers. And after the programme had been running, well, roughly 14 years, a law was actually introduced in Bolivia because the programme had been delivering such good results. And now schools have to replace ultra-processed and unhealthy foods with native and regional foods. So this is a really powerful tool also for kind of protecting that local food heritage and culture. The second lever, really critically important, we need more investment in sustainable production in the UK. And that needs to really be focused as well on nutritious foods. So really creating that alignment between what we're producing and what we need to consume for a healthy diet. And this investment will obviously create economic benefits, as well as being critical for actually increasing that uptake of healthy, sustainable diets. We can't meet a demand without supplying it. So this part of the puzzle is critical. So what's actually needed, though, to make this happen and to make this work? Well, first of all, farmers and growers will need financial support. Oh, goodbye. Never mind, you probably all read it anyway. They need financial support to be able to make that transition and adopt more sustainable production methods. Really importantly, they need a fair reward for their produce. Simon's example of the daffodil pickers struck me. They get 7p. That's disgusting. And this is replicated, across most supply chains, not just in the UK, but in other parts of the world. So that's something we really need to address. And the last thing here is really a level playing field. So we've obviously had farmers' protests ongoing in this country, but also in other parts of Europe. A big part of that, as far as I understand it, is that requirements in Europe and here in the UK are being undercut by lower quality produce that's coming into the market and is sold for cheaper prices. That's not going to work. So that's something that also needs to be addressed. And the last thing that I think holds a lot of potential in increasing this uptake of healthy, sustainable diets, particularly thinking about fruit and veg and plant proteins, is marketing and advertising. There's a lot of debate going on at the moment around limiting advertising of foods that are high in fat, salt, and sugar. On the kind of flip side of that, social marketing in particular is a really powerful tool to make veg exciting, to make it attractive, to make it desirable, and to keep it front of mind for consumers. And social marketing, for those of you that don't know, is an approach that's based on delivering and maintaining behaviour change for the good of society. So I think we can probably all agree that eating more fruit and veg fits in nicely there. And an example kind of from my own work on this is a campaign that I was part of with M&S, Marks and Spencer. They ran this social marketing campaign with some households, basically trying to help them eat more fruit and veg and plant proteins. And it used simple, positive language, focused on more fibre and diversity. So it wasn't about, telling people to eat less meat or sort of cut out things that they enjoy. It was really focused on, let's help you eat more plants. And it was tremendously successful. People were cooking from scratch more. They were bonding around food, within their families. They ended up eating a lot more fruit and veg, but feedback was that they were doing that sort of quite naturally because we provided them with recipes and tips. And those behaviours were maintained over time as well. So yeah, this is a powerful lever that government and food businesses can kind of collaborate on. And I think there's a golden opportunity really, especially for retailers, to promote more seasonal British veg. Why aren't we seeing that already? That should be happening. There's a couple of islands in Tesco sometimes with a few things that people can pick, but I think that needs to be done a lot more, basically, and a lot better. And that's it from me. Thank you.